At the very beginning, we see a house with several cars parked nearby. The scene then shifts directly inside this house, where we see a man heading somewhere with purpose. Suddenly, he stops, anxiety flashing across his face. He's found a suitcase in the house, and he's baffled. Why is it here? Next, we're shown a photograph of 3 people, and he thinks to himself that it might be best to ask the Ajumma about it tomorrow. A moment later, he's standing at a door, deep in thought. As he stands there, he suddenly remembers he forgot to collect the daily reward in his favorite game. He opens the door, reflecting on how dependence on something can make a person lose self-control. As he enters the room, his eyes are drawn to a fan lazily spinning away. As he continues to survey the room, he notices a girl sleeping peacefully. This guy, our main character, clearly isn't pleased that she's sleeping, and he decides to wake her up. But first, he wants to confirm if she's actually asleep, since it seems like he needs something from her. However, there's no response. The girl remains silent, continuing to sleep, or maybe she just doesn't want to answer him. Realizing this, our main character decides to put on some cool headphones and indulge in a tasty pie. At that moment, he realizes that his dependence is linked to his stepmother, something he doesn't seem to hide. He might even be a bit proud of it. Some time passes, and the sleeping stepmother starts to wake up because the main character is making quite a racket. Morning arrives, and our bespectacled protagonist approaches his stepmother to ask if she slept well. She's busy preparing a delicious breakfast, smiling as she replies that she slept just fine, just like he did. Wanting to please him, she tells him she's made a traditional Korean dish for breakfast. Unexpectedly, the guy isn't thrilled. He tells his stepmother that he was expecting curry instead. She gently reminds her spoiled child that he had curry yesterday, and a little variety is good for him. She assures him that the Korean dish is tasty too, and encourages him to try it. A moment later, they're both seated at the kitchen table, eating. Suddenly, the guy with glasses notices something odd. It feels to him like his stepmother is staring at him strangely. She claims she's just curious if he likes the food. Although he listens carefully, it still feels off to him. He expresses his discomfort, saying he can't enjoy his meal with someone staring at him. In response, the girl says nothing, only continuing to look into his eyes, a slight smile forming on her lips. The guy grows tired of the awkward silence and complains that he might get indigestion from the food. We learn that our main character's late father left him with a new stepmother, Kwon Hae-soo, who is now sitting across from him. The scene shifts to show 3 cacti, each labeled with different names, and the guy comments that once everyone calmed down, they started living together. Then, he recalls the day his stepmother was introduced to him, a day so significant he can't forget it. Back in his childhood, Jaewon's first impression of his stepmother wasn't great. She seemed cold and stern to him. Around the same time, Kwon Hae-soo learns Jaewon's name, and he realizes how dangerous she seemed, almost as if she might strangle him with cannonballs when he least expected it. This might have been because, despite her beauty, she had always wanted a son and wouldn't miss her chance. Suddenly, Jaewon is jolted back to reality by a loud scream, his stepmother trying to snap him out of his thoughts. Kwon Hae-soo reminds our main character that he still needs to eat all his beans and shouldn't delay. She tries to help by extending her chopsticks towards his plate, aiming to feed him a bean. When she manages to grab one, she asks him to open his mouth wider. However, Jaewon, remembering that he's capable of doing things on his own, reminds his stepmother that he's not a child anymore. But Kwon Hae-soo makes it clear she doesn't care about that. He'll always be her little child. Jaewon realizes that arguing is pointless, so he opens his mouth and eats the bean, accepting defeat. His stepmother asks him to chew well and inquires if it tastes good. To avoid offending her, he replies that it's not bad. At this moment, Kwon Hae-soo enjoys seeing how much her stepson has grown, believing it's all because of the beans. After finishing his meal, Jaewon decides to ask his stepmother something important. He's remembered the suitcase and wants to know why it was in the living room. The girl tenses up, her expression clearly showing that she's confused and trying to come up with an excuse on the fly. Kwon Hae-soo knows she won't be able to come up with a believable excuse. She understands that Jaewon is grown and independent, and she wants to say something. However, Their conversation is conveniently interrupted by a notification on her phone. Realizing she's late for work, she tells Jaewon they'll talk after she returns, leaving him with no answers. First, she heads to the bathroom, reminding Jaewon to come back from college early. She enters the bathroom, and Jaewon reluctantly agrees to eat all his beans. Alone at the table, he muses that he's never wanted to know the taste of soybeans less than he does now. Later, our main character, now changed into fresh clothes, walks around his college campus with a friend who's complaining about the heat. Jaewon doesn't feel hot, and his friend jokingly suggests it's because he's skinny, even though he believes he's more muscular than Jaewon. This friend then shows off a bump on his arm, bragging about his muscles, while Jaewon awkwardly stares, unsure of what to say without offending him. As they walk, they overhear another student's conversation. A guy is pestering a girl, asking her to do homework with him, but she clearly isn't interested. Jaewon, baffled by the interaction, asks his friend what's going on. His friend explains that the guy, Sunbae, is just trying to convince the girl to have lunch with him, despite her constant refusals. Jaewon notes that the girl, Suyin, must get a lot of invitations, but his friend disagrees. Suddenly, Suyin notices Jaewon and rushes over to him, leaving the persistent Sunbae behind. She asks Jaewon if he's heading to college, and his friend, watching this unfold, believes it's madness. He suspects Suyin is asking Jaewon out on a date and wonders what Jaewon did to catch her attention. Suyin, tired of the small talk, whispers something to Jaewon, hinting that she wants to see him later. But Jaewon, uninterested, politely excuses himself, saying he promised his mother he'd return home early. His friend is baffled, urging him to stay and tell his mother he'll be late. But Jaewon insists his mother has something important to say. As Jaewon walks away, his friend can't understand why he's so eager to leave, even considering him a mama's boy. He's shocked that Jaewon would turn down Suyin and can't fathom what he's thinking. On the bus ride home, Jaewon gazes out the window, lost in thought. He remembers how his stepmother promised to always be by his side until he went to college, and the thought makes him feel sad. He's haunted by the realization that they've never had, and likely never will have, such a conversation. Eventually, Jaewon reaches his house and begins to open the door, curious about what awaits him inside. As he steps inside, he's struck by how dark it is. He takes off his shoes and begins to slowly wander around, searching for Kwon Hae-soo. Finally, he finds the light switch and flips it on, revealing a mess that reminds him of a gamer's room. Suddenly, Jaewon remembers the suitcase from the day before and rushes to check if it's still there. But to his surprise, it's gone. He stands there, staring at the empty space, trying to make sense of it all. Worried, he tosses his bag aside and runs toward his stepmother's room, hoping to find some answers. When he reaches the door, Jaewon, full of anxiety, throws it open and calls out for his stepmother. To his relief, Kwon Hae-soo is there, standing and watching him as if she's been waiting for him. Seeing his distressed state, she asks what's wrong, noticing how much he's sweating. But Jaewon just silently stares at her. Without saying a word, he suddenly hugs her tightly, afraid that she might have left him. Kwon Hae-soo, surprised but touched, asks what's going on. Jaewon explains that he was worried she'd left after he couldn't find the suitcase and saw all the lights turned off. He begs her not to scare him like that again, and she promises never to leave him. Jaewon, still anxious, asks her to confirm that she won't leave him. She reassures him, and he asks if he can stay with her tonight because there are monsters in his room. Kwon Hae-soo is shocked by the request, but Jaewon insists. Of course, for Kwon Hae-soo, this was a real shock. She just couldn't wrap her head around why this guy wanted to stay with her. That night, our main character tells her that he wants to sleep in her room because he's genuinely terrified of being alone. Fast forward a bit, and we see a very satisfied guy lying on the bed, just about to drift off to sleep. Mission accomplished. But then, the door to his room slowly starts to open, and light spills in from the hallway. It seems like someone is about to enter. It turns out to be his stepmother, who silently approaches him to tell him something. Her actions wake him up, and he's shocked that she would rouse him in the middle of the night. It was completely unexpected. We then shift our focus back to the stepmother, who's now contemplating whether she should test drive something with our main character. A moment later, she lies down on the bed, and now the two of them are sleeping in the same room, ensuring that no monster will scare them tonight. Once again, we see our main character, who can't seem to fall asleep. He's just staring at the ceiling, unable to believe that Kwon Hae-soo actually allowed him to sleep here. Lying next to her, he starts to feel incredibly nervous, and it's making it impossible for him to drift off. Then, Hanian decides to check if his stepmother is asleep. It appears that she has already drifted off since she isn't moving much. Realizing this, he decides to lean in and whisper something in her ear. He means to share something important that he's been keeping to himself. Our main character quietly tells the sleeping girl that he's been very worried she might disappear while he's sleeping. He also admits that he doesn't want to lose his stepmother, which is why he doesn't want to stray far from her. He understands that this might be an odd thing to say and that she might even despise him for it. But he makes it clear that whenever she's next to him, he feels these strange, overwhelming emotions, and he finds it hard to figure out what they mean. If you enjoyed, consider sticking by for a little longer, and maybe even subscribe. I hope to see you again.